much. Welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny Management Board. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please identify yourself. Thank you very much. To ensure the recording quality is maintained, could members speak as clearly as possible, keep background noise to a minimum, and ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent, especially the laptop that is not turned to silent because it pinged recently. So everybody check their laptops, please. Okay, we don't have any councillors joining us remotely. We are expecting John Hobbs, Corporate Director, to join us remotely, but he is not here yet. We have a number of other attendees present. I will ask them to go, because there aren't too many, and I think it is useful for people who are watching this. I'll just go down the line and ask people to briefly introduce themselves, if that's okay. So we'll also get the committee to introduce themselves. So we'll start with the lead. We'll start with me. I'm Ben Proctor. I'm the chair of the committee. Next, the leader, please.
Jonathan Lester, leader of Herefordshire Council.
Rachel Sanders, Director of Finance.
Hilary Hall, Corporate Director, Community Wellbeing.
Councillor Clara Dandy, Cabinet Member, Adults Health and Wellbeing.
Councillor Philip Price, Cabinet Member, Infrastructure and Transport.
Councillor Elizabeth Swinglehurst, Deputy Leader, Herefordshire Council, Cabinet Member for Culture and the Environment.
Thank you all for coming. And now with the committee, starting with Councillor Cole.
Simeon Cole, and I'm the Ward Councillor for Gumbridge.
Richard Thomas, Wormside Ward.
Frank Cornthwaite, Home Award.
Ed O'Driscoll, Chair of Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee.
Tony Fagan, Chair of the Children's Scrutiny Committee.
Jenny Bartlett, Leinster, Member of the SMB.
Pauline Crockett, Chair of Healthcare and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee.
Lewis Stark, Vice Chair of Scrutiny Management Board and Chair of the Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, committee. And finally, if Daniel could introduce himself and his colleagues.
Hello, I'm Daniel Webb, the Statutory Scrutiny Officer. I'm joined today by Donna Thornton and Simon Cann.
Thank you very much. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we've received apologies from Councillor Liz Harvey and Councillor David Davis.
And any substitutes?
No substitutes.
Okay. Any members have any declarations of interest of items on the agenda? I don't think it's a declarable interest, but it's worth everybody noting. I always do when we talk about the capital programme that I sit on the Stronger Towns Board for the City Council, and obviously some of the substantial capital programmes have Stronger Towns money in them. Have any proposed correct? Sorry, yes?
Councillor Proctor, just to say that I am on the Lanwarn Village Hall Committee, and that has been one of the successful applicants of the capital grant scheme.
Congratulations to Lanwarn. Minutes. Have there been any proposed corrections?
No.
Then can members of the board who were present at the meeting on the 1st of July please vote to approve the minutes as a correct record? All those in favour? Any against? Any abstain? Thank you. That seems carried. Do we have any questions from members of the public?
No public questions received.
And any questions from members of the council?
No questions received from members of the council.
Okay, thank you very much. So just to outline how we're going to allocate time, we are going to spend a maximum of 90 minutes on the budget, so item 8 before we get to item 9. Then we will take a break. Then we will spend, I think, only 20 minutes on the performance report, and then we will have about half an hour for recommendations. So we'll have 90 minutes just to discuss the budget and then a break. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll have about half an hour to discuss the work programme of this committee and other committees. Members of Cabinet are welcome to stay for that discussion, but we won't be hurt if they wish to leave. So, and then in terms of how we're going to structure discussion on the budget, broadly, we'll talk about revenue, including savings and use of reserves. Then we'll talk about capital, and then we'll talk a little bit about treasury management. The committee is always very interested in the interrelationship between revenue and capital, so I imagine when we're talking about revenue, we will also bring in capital. That's absolutely fine. So when we get to talking about capital, that will be sort of capital projects that we haven't discussed. Just to note that we've obviously had the report. We've had a chance to talk to the Director of Finance and her team in some detail about the report. And we've had a chance to discuss our lines of inquiry. Leader, do you want to say anything? It's absolutely fine if you don't, but do you want to say anything to sort of set the scene for the budget position at Q2 before we ask some questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just to say, it's not really to send apologies because he's not a member of the committee, but Councillor Stoddart is not here today because he's got some planned surgery. So I'd just like to wish him all the best, and I'm sure you'd all join me in hoping everything goes well for that. Otherwise, he'd be sat where I am now, so we wish him all the best. No, just in the absence of Councillor Stoddart, the performance of the budget, it came up at Cabinet, and you were actually there, weren't you, Chair? So we're, given the financial context, the fact that we delivered a budget that was delivered with a £500,000 surplus last year, so that was last financial year, so that's a very sound financial position to be in, given the pressures that we face, all local government faces at this time with regard to demand, extra customers, as it were, as I like to say. We are managing these pressures from a firm foundation and a stable financial foundation. But we have to see this also in the context of the local government settlement, which we will be learning about in 2 weeks' time, and that will really that will highlight the financial situation of all local government very shortly. So we'll be making decisions in that context. But in terms of delivering this budget, with the minor variances that we see, and a lot of management action to be undertaken as we work through the delivery of the budget, I think we're in a positive, strong, robust position. But the virtue of bringing this performance to scrutiny is to involve more people in the decision-making process with your recommendations to ensure that in the delivery of this budget and the delivery of the performance, we don't miss any trick in our reasoning to make sure that we achieve the objectives of the council. So really interested in your discussion, and also really interested in particular in your recommendations that I'm sure you will inform us of as a result of this meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to start by turning our attention to community wellbeing, which doesn't come as a surprise. I'm sure, I know every member's, but I'm sure Councillor Crockett especially will have some questions here, but I'm going to start off by asking if we park temporary accommodation just for the moment, we will come to that. Can you just give us an overview of, given that the budget this year was a significant increase on last year, where have the further cost pressures come from, and what actions are we taking with that?
That's a very broad question. So yes, we did have an increase in our budget, and that was based on the evidence that we saw and what we predicted would come this year. Where we have seen additional demand this year has been twofold. It's been through the hospital. So the hospital itself has rarely seen a day when it's been less than 100% occupancy. So there's an inevitable consequence that whilst not everyone will need adult social care, there is an inevitable consequence that more demand will come on us. We can't predict that. That has been a particular feature this year. I think that's been driven by some post-COVID impact. So we are still seeing the impact of that. We're also seeing people deteriorating in hospital. So when they come out of hospital, they're at a lower level of ability and mobility generally, so do need more intensive care if we could even get them back to their pre-hospital stay levels. So there's a whole variety of things at work here. I think the other thing that we're seeing is, and we can never fully predict this, is people who had previously funded their own care then falling below the threshold of the income, and therefore their care then falls on us to pay for. Whilst we can predict to a certain extent, we don't know who, we can't do it fully. So there will always be an impact of that. We've seen more of that this year as the cost of living has impacted. I think that's been exacerbated by the fact that people, and you will have seen it in the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, people are living longer. We have a long life expectancy in Herefordshire, but they're not living healthy long lives, if that makes sense. So people are living longer in ill health. So typically what we're seeing is stays, particularly in residential care, increasing. You would normally expect to see, so if you think about residential care and nursing care are at your high end of care provision, you would typically expect to see someone stay in residential and nursing maximum of 2 years, less for nursing, but certainly for residential. We're seeing that now at 3 and 4 years. So inevitably there is a cost implication of that as people are staying longer. And then the final bit is that, and we're starting to see this come through, is in terms of continuing healthcare. So the eligibility policy for continuing healthcare changed in June, where the Integrated Care Board is now solely focused on paying for the health elements of a package where previously they had contributed to the care costs. You can't differentiate the two because someone with significant health concerns that they need that fully funded is clearly going to need quite intensive care. So we are seeing that falling more on the local authority because, and clearly we need to look at that care package to ensure that that's fit for the individual as well as cost, providing value for money, and is not, and different ways in which we could provide that care package. I'm sure there are other things at play, but for me they are the main ones that I'm seeing coming through. I hope that's helpful.
That gives us plenty to work with. Councillor Stark did have his hand up, but I think we'll go to Councillor Crockett first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Hilary. I don't think it really surprises any of us about the situation with Wye Valley and the Herefordshire Council, because this has continued. It's just getting worse. And I know when I was in Councillor Gandy's role, we had a real push on challenging Wye Valley with the continuing healthcare plans that they were adapting to, perhaps, should we say, their priorities rather than our priorities. So I think, our team that were working really hard with that should be complimented, but how are we doing now with the team? Are they still concentrating on the CHC, the continuing healthcare plans? And, that plan is there for somebody with a clinical need. So if somebody has got something wrong with them that they need to come back into their own home or wherever, it should be paid for by the ICB. And I've challenged the ICB because only 1 to 2% of all applications do actually get confirmed. And I think that's really bad because then it just comes back to us. So just, a quick sort of synopsis is, we need to really keep pushing them. And I'm sure you're having many discussions with the ICB, and Councillor Gandy's nodding there because, we keep on about this because it is really important so that we get what those people who are coming out of hospital, that aren't perhaps getting better in hospital, as you've already said, to get the best for them.
So just to reassure you and the committee, we are really pushing hard with continuing healthcare. As I say, the eligibility policy was changed in June. So we are we responded to that. We are continuing to.
Sorry, can I just, for those of us who are not as close, so when you say eligibility policy was changed, was that a national change or was that a local change?
Sorry, I should have switched my. It was a local change, so it was the Integrated Care Board. It was driven by national guidance, so nationally the NHS is looking at eligibility for continuing healthcare, and continuing healthcare is provision for those that have significant complex health needs. So it's not necessarily just people coming out of hospital. It is often working age adults with lifelong disabilities and health conditions. So it's a long-term funding commitment. We've brought in additional resources this year to help us to manage those cases. So we're managing them in a more, whereas previously we had managed them within our social work teams, we're now bringing that much more centrally within the directorate so we can apply more consistency and more pressure and kind of be constantly monitoring it. We are seeing a number of disputes, so there is a disputes process within the policy. We are seeing a number of those disputes going through the different levels, and we are continuing to fight that. Fight is a very strong word. We are continuing to contest those where we believe it is right that we should be pushing that. It is a national issue. Lots of councils are facing this, and certainly within the West Midlands, through the West Midlands directors, we are campaigning through that avenue as well. But just to reassure you, certainly locally, we are continuing to we keep a really close eye on it, continue to monitor it. I think the other bit to say is obviously that's continuing healthcare. And just to Councillor Crockett's point, we do have our team still based in the hospital that manages all the discharges of people not necessarily at that high level of continuing healthcare, but moving out of the hospital.
I didn't actually doubt it at all that we're doing it because, you know, we've had a strong input there. It's just, you know, one of my thoughts were about the demand and complexity, and we know that the complexity of cases does cost a lot of money, but at the end of the day we have to be able to support those people. And one of the key drivers to the overspend, I feel, is that the budgeted numbers of people requiring all this support, particularly older adults and those complex needs, we need to really try and work out a way that we can help with that, reduce those demands. And do you have something that you can tell us that you're doing specifically to address that? Is there something different now that we're past Q2?
So yes, we are in short, but so we've had over the last 2 months a kind of sprint work, if you like, at the front door. So we've recognised that we are seeing obviously more people from the community approaching us through the front door as well as the hospital. So it's a dual thing of work in the front door to really understand what people are contacting us about, and can we've always done it, but there's a much more intense focus on this. Can we respond to those needs in a different way? So that we're not automatically thinking about some care provision. Actually, are there opportunities in which we can signpost people to opportunities within the community? And yes, we've always done that, but we've had a real focus on it. And I think one of the reasons for doing that is to identify, are there gaps where we can start to commission the voluntary and community sector? So this isn't just about saying we're expecting the community and voluntary sector to pick things up within their own resources. Actually, is there an opportunity for us to commission differently? So then rather than just commissioning domiciliary care, nursing care, residential, can we actually be commissioning the community and voluntary sector to provide part of the support package. Yes, it makes it more complicated, if you like, in terms of managing that, but actually is that a better way of using our money, not always automatically going to the traditional way in which we've previously done it, which I think, for me, we have quite a traditional way of working with the market in Herefordshire in terms of how we've commissioned traditionally. I think in the days when the demand was manageable, that was less of an issue. Where we've now got demand rising, we need to be looking much more, and that's part of what we're looking at, certainly starting now but moving into next year. How can we work in more of a partnership arrangement with the market? So we're really driving value through our contracts, through our purchases into the market. Councillor Crockett will be aware we've had a historical reliance in Herefordshire on spot purchasing care. We've had very few what have traditionally been called block contracts with care homes. And that's quite unusual. And obviously, if you've got spot purchases, you're completely driven by whatever the rate in the market is on any one day. If we have a block arrangement and you need to have a mixture of the two, you can set your price and you know you've got that provision and you can place people into those homes and etc. So that's very much how we want to move to much more of that strategic partnering with care homes that enables us to manage our money better. Coming back to domiciliary care, that is where we've seen the increase this year. So the numbers have significantly increased from the numbers on which we set the budget. But actually our costs of domiciliary care have only gone up by about 4% this year. So whilst the numbers have gone up hugely, the costs haven't. And again, that comes back to the fact that we purchase domiciliary care through a framework where we set the hourly limits. So the fluctuation is really where we've had to go off contract to meet specific needs or specific geographical challenges, frankly, where we've got, you know, Herefordshire, it's a very, getting care into some of our more remote areas sometimes comes at a cost. So whilst our domiciliary care activity has significantly increased, and I don't have a problem with that because I'd rather people were able to live in their own homes and be supported in their own homes, we're not actually seeing the costs go up there. Where we are seeing the costs is we're more in the residential area, and that's where I come back to where I said before, people are staying longer in residential because of health needs. So it's quite a complicated picture, but for me it is about how we drive better relationships in the market and more better value for money commissioning in the market. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
Have you?
Can I just say one more?
Yep.
Thank you. And I think it's really important that you mentioned Wye Valley, again, working in partnership with us, because we need to send people or allocate different areas to different needs. So, you know, we've looked at different ways of identifying what people are going into Wye Valley with, and then trying to address that from their front door into a different service. I think that's one thing that we're really doing well. I think the sad thing is really somebody goes into hospital with one thing, they get admitted, and then they become worse. So the important thing is to get the issue identified and then get them back home, which is the best place for them, as we all know, but with the right care package. And it's that care package that cost is something we've really got to get a grip of. Domiciliary care, like you said, it isn't a big problem with us, but residential care costs are skyrocketing. So how are we going to combat these price rises that we are having to contribute to in these care homes without any support from the community?
So one of the things we've invested in this year is a product called Care Cubed, which is a national tool which helps us to derive a fair cost of care. It's a national system that's used, cloud-based system, where you input information from the provider in terms of costs. We input our information in terms of needs, and what comes out of the system is a fair cost of care. Now, you don't wholly rely on, you don't kind of use that as an absolute, but you use it as a means of determining that is a fair cost of care on which we can then negotiate with the provider. At the moment, we don't have anything like that. So we are basing it on historical, on the way we've always done it. This system will give us something that is benchmarked with other authorities, recognising the rural aspects of Herefordshire, which will inevitably put some increase on the costs. But it brings all of those variables into place. So I think that gives us an initial, that will help us to really establish, are we paying a fair cost of care, particularly for high cost packages, to ensure that we are absolutely paying a fair cost of care. And that, I think, will help. I know it will help us drive better negotiations with the market then as we go forward. None of this we can solve overnight. This is a build-up over many years of how we've historically done practice. But I think using tools like that will really help us. And certainly, I used it in my previous authority. It was really successful for us. Both Worcestershire County Council and the Integrated Care Board are using it locally. So again, I think that just helps us, if you think about that wider market, it helps us manage it in that way as well.
I'm just having a look at it. It looks pretty straightforward, doesn't it, when you look at the tool that's online. But the other big issue, and I know we're trying to address this, is looking at supplying our own facility for this this need that we have got. So again, we need to look about how we can invest to save and support our people in Herefordshire.
Yes, and we have to look at all our options in terms of our own provision, as well as working with the market in different ways. I think we've traditionally not had a proactive approach with the market, and I think whilst we've done it in increments, now I think we have to do a very much more positive, proactive engagement with the market overall.
So my final question. Sorry.
I thought the last one was your final question.
No, this is my final for a bit. We are where we are at the end of Q2. So how are we looking for this? Because we're nearly at the end of Q3. How are we looking now? And have we addressed and identified things that we need to be doing really strongly and quickly?
So we are certainly seeing through Q3 a reduction in numbers as we anticipated. We traditionally always see costs rise and activity rise in the first half of the year. All our modelling that we've looked at demonstrates that. We are already seeing in Q3 our numbers are reducing and the costs are reducing as well. The work that we've done at the front door has really helped with that, and I anticipate that continuing through into Q4. It's the way in which we forecast as if people were staying with us right through the year. So that number always looks higher in the first half of the year. It's prudent, it's the way to do it. But I think what we do see in Q3 is that significant movement. So already I get the numbers weekly. There's been 10 less people in the system, that we are providing care and support this week as compared with last week. So that does have an impact, and we will see that go through over the next quarter as well. I know it doesn't help in terms of budgets and everything else, but that is what we are facing. I think what's also interesting, because as I say, we've done a lot of modelling, particularly around domiciliary care, and actually the activity levels now are the same as they were pre-COVID. So they were at this level pre-COVID. They dropped off through COVID because people didn't want carers coming into their homes and everything else. And actually what we're seeing is them coming back up to somewhere near the levels that we had previously, which I think is quite interesting in terms of that, because we've still got an ageing population. You would expect it to be growing even more. Actually, we're just coming back to pre-COVID levels.
Interesting you mentioned COVID, because today, 5 years ago, was the first COVID vaccine that was administered. So 5 years, my goodness. Sorry, Chair.
I think it's mostly an advantage having other committee chairs in my committee, but there's a lot of confidence that goes with that. I've got Councillors Stark, O'Driscoll and Thomas, and then that may be it, and then we move on to temporary accommodation. So one other thing that just before we do that we might pick up in a bit is this idea of trying to do things differently, and you keep talking about kind of a legacy, and so I think that will maybe pick that up a bit in transformation as well, because I think that's an area of interest to the committee. But Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. And that was a very interesting conversation. It has picked up on some of the points, but we know what's driving the divergence, Leader, and I want to go to the Cabinet now, because we're here to hold the Cabinet to account, not officers. This issue with the ICB was one that Paul Walker, the Chief Executive, highlighted, I think, in a meeting with some of us, about needing to push back the fact that their cost pressures do not become our cost pressures. I just wonder, Leader, what you are doing about it at a political level in order to engage with the ICB and make sure that what Paul Walker said becomes a reality and that we aren't forced to take on these costs, which we should not be taking on because they have their own budget pressures. That's my first question, Leader.
Yeah, thank you. And we have had high-level meetings with the ICB, and especially when we think about the fact that they're having to reorganise and they're having to find lots of cuts themselves. And one thing I've been saying at these meetings is, you may be having to make your cuts, but you've still got to deliver your services as business as usual, just in the same way that we've had huge pressures on our services, both with children's social care and adult social care, and we've had to make savings, as you all know, and we've been good at achieving those savings. You have to still keep the services going at the right level of need. I think the interesting thing here, and it's where it becomes politically acute, is there has to be pushback on this issue about care and differentiating care that is ongoing just to the care of the person, or care that is related to the actual need, the medical need. Now, back in the olden days when I was a little boy, remember HAPPY, the sitcom, and it was based about the people that were actually sitting in a bed in hospital getting well. Now the emphasis is on getting somebody out of hospital as soon as possible, out of the hospital system, because of all the pressures they face. But the challenge we really have to push back on is that where there's a medical need, that need should be met by the health service just as much as we will do the adult social care bits that fall under our remit. It's a continuing, ongoing discussion. And we will continue to have those discussions and push back, as Councillor Gandhi and Hilary Hall have already said. But I'm really keen to know what this management board thinks should be the key focus of our council response on this ongoing issue. We have a health and wellbeing board meeting next week. That's not necessarily going to be the focus of that meeting, but I think that's a perfect forum to really bring this issue to the fore, and I would like the committee's support on that. But if there are other recommendations that you think we should be doing to make sure that this is a high-level political necessity for the council to ensure that we are really pushing back on this, then I welcome those recommendations.
Okay. Well, certainly, Chair, I think that should be one of our recommendations. The second point I want to go on is to the budget forecasting side, Leader. We are here in quarter two, and we've heard the reasons why we've got another overspend in community and wellbeing after a 20% uplift that the council agreed for 24-25, or 25-26, I should say. What is your view on the way that overspend has emerged? I mean, do you feel that the Cabinet has a sufficient oversight of what's happening in the Directorate, since that seems to be one of the areas which could actually affect us for budget setting next year? So I'd be interested to know what your feel is about it, and whether you think you're confident that you have a grip over what's happening in this particular Directorate.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. You heard the Director say that the numbers are going down for the third quarter, so that's an encouraging thing. But the 151 officer are going to have to remind me when I said this, but quite a while ago, I was very concerned that budgets always end up being overspent because we're facing demand. So I said we have to come up with a strategy to cope with that extra demand, which is exactly what we did as a strategy. Because I said you can't keep forecasting these budgets that then don't match the customers that we actually get. And it's all semantics if you look at it in one way, but we talk about overspends, but that word overspend makes it sound like, oh, well, you know, we're not spending wisely, so we're overspent. Now, what is happening, there's a few other factors as well, but what is happening is the amount of customers is going up. You know, and we're having to mitigate that situation. And sometimes it's very difficult to budget for knowing who's going to come through that door. Now, with children's services, what you can do is you can do lots of work in terms of making a better society, making people, you know, early help, all of these interventions, and then running a really good service that reacts to problems when they're minor. And then if you have a really good service, then you can mitigate the extra costs. But with adult care, when you're talking about a long-term issue, and as has already been said today, where people are living longer, but their health needs are increasing and their care needs are increasing, it's a very difficult problem to solve quickly. So what we do is we manage the cost of this care, and the director has already alluded to how we're getting better at managing the cost of things. And we've benefited also from the fact that the cost, the amount of care has gone up, but the cost of the care has remained relatively stable. That's allowed us to mitigate the situation. But when we're facing increase in the amount of customers we're getting, the only way we can manage that is have a sufficient budgeting process that allows us the flexibility with our finances, which is what the policy has done so far. In terms of moving forward the budgets for the following years, this is where we really have to make sure that we are financially as lean and as focused and targeted with our resources as possible. At the moment, we're going through the budget process for the next financial year, the budget that we will set in February, and there's a huge amount of work behind the scenes to rationalise the costs, to make sure we're only paying for what we need to pay right across the system, and that work is ongoing at pace, because I want to be setting sustainable budgets for the foreseeable future for this council, operating an organisation that is minimising costs without the need to try and reduce the amount of services that we provide. So there's a lot of work going behind the scenes to have a more sustainable approach to this service delivery, but it's a real challenge. And as I say, anything you think that we need to attempt to try and make sure that we are taking on board all of those factors, then please put that as part of your recommendations.
Just before Councillor Gandhi comes in, I'm interested in where you think the budget setting for this directorate is going to go, and now you know what happened in Q2. Because, as we know, we have a fair funding risk in the council, which could be a very big risk for us. So we are going to have to try and manage that risk. And one of the areas that could actually add to that pressure would be community wellbeing. So seeing where we are in Q2, seeing what we're doing within the directorate, are you confident you're going to come up with a budget for 26-27 that is not going to end up with an overspend June 26-27 this director as well? That's my final question.
Just before you answer, Councillor Gandhi is keen to come in, and I'm sure she would like to join. I'm not going to stop you speaking, but I'm sure she would be happy to join in on this conversation.
Thank you. I think there's a couple of things. We've obviously met with the leader and gone through a whole list of things that we intend not just to do in the next financial year in order to address the budget issues, but obviously things that we are starting to do now to address the budget for this financial year. And there are a significant number of things that we're doing. The front door issue that Hilary talked about is something we're doing now. I mean, we're not leaving it until the end of the financial year and then saying to everybody, well, we've come in on budget, so we don't need to do this. We're doing this now. But ultimately, Herefordshire, like many rural counties, is an ageing population county. It's where people come to retire and they end up obviously loving where they are, and we, as a community wellbeing directorate, we have to deal with the issues that go with that, and that is fine. But what we need to be doing, and what we're working really hard on, is the prevention of people becoming unwell in the first place. We can't stop people ageing. You know, I visited Lewis many years ago and recognised that people there were being taken there with no illnesses, but because they thought it would allow them to live longer. People will live longer. We just need them to live healthier. And you can't start that situation when people are in their 40s and 50s. It has to start very early on. And so what we're doing within public health and with Talk Community, and some of the reasons we did the work we did with the £2 million that we put forward for community organisations, was the emphasis on health and protection. Because quite a lot of this stems from people being isolated, and therefore people don't necessarily know that they've got issues. They become, until they actually enter the hospital, it could have actually been stopped a lot earlier. Little things, little tiny things like having people cut their toenails properly so that they can walk. That sounds very small, but actually that makes a huge difference to the lives of people. And if they can't walk properly because their toenails are not cut properly and they're so thick, then they fall and then they end up in hospital, and then we start on the hamster wheel of what we can find ourselves in. So this strategy covers the whole of the council. It's about really starting much earlier, educating people, working with people to make them stay healthier longer. So we end up going back to where we were before, with people staying in residential accommodation perhaps for 2 years, and people going into hospital, but being able to come out as almost as healthy as they were when they came in, and us just doing a few weeks with them to get them back to the level they were before.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to provide a bit of assurance on the budget setting process. So it's incredibly complex in a service area such as this, which obviously has a certain amount of volatility in its budget throughout the year. But what the budget setting process is not for 26-27 is a finance-led budget. So it's informed by a variety of sources, one of which is the in-year performance and consideration of the activity data and how that has changed in year from the client numbers originally set at. So we look at the activity data in year, and we work very closely with the directorate to understand planned changes and their impact. We consider growth, we join it with demographic data, we look at the JSNA, performance data, etc., the planned work through the community sector. So it's a variety of inputs that drive the client numbers and costs to build that 26-27 budget. And that process then goes through considerable challenge to consider whether it is realistic, whether it's reasonable to meet the service needs, and that process is ongoing at the moment.
No, I'm just going to say, Chair, there's a recommendation here in what the Section 151 officer said, which is transparency. A lot of our questions comes about because we're not always sure what's going on behind the scenes in terms of the budget setting and the budget work. The more that you can actually let us have Section 151 officer on what is happening, the more I think the council itself will be reassured. And I think that should be a recommendation for us from this committee. Thank you.
I'm going to bring in Councillor O'Driscoll. Don't just one question has occurred to me that don't answer this straight away, but maybe it can be brought in the answers. Is the degree to which the health side is involved in some of the prevention work that Councillor Ganding was talking, because it feels like this is a shared problem. This is like don't answer it now, but if it can be brought into answering whatever Councillor O'Driscoll and Councillor Thomas have, that would be great.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off by saying I'm not sure about emulating the sitcom Only When I Laugh is the best idea, because they were all in for about 3 years. So if we're going to start that kind of length in hospital, it might not be great for the budget, I wouldn't have thought. I listened very carefully, Hilary, to what you said at the very, very start, and the reasons you listed for why we were looking at the significant overspend. Post-COVID impact, people deteriorating in hospital, people who previously funded their own care falling below the threshold, people living longer but not healthier, stays in residential care increasing from 2 years to up to 3 to 4 years, and then obviously the ICB changing their continuing healthcare policy, which was changed in June. I don't think any of these were surprises, though, were they? I mean, were they? When did we know about the ICB, which was only the last quarter, in fairness, if it didn't change till June? But all of the other things, you know, the rise in healthcare, I think it was 15% in 23-24, wasn't it? I mean, I guess my question is, didn't you warn that it wouldn't be enough?
We know the reasons. Yes, you're absolutely right. All of those reasons are the same. What we don't know is actually what that activity will produce. So I can't. It would be. I can't kind of guesstimate the exact numbers. If I was to go out and say I need another, on top of the additional 20%, another 20% on the budget, and I didn't then spend it, that puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the council in order to meet that. So there is a degree of trying to weigh up what is prudent in terms of what we know and what we can realistically expect. I think what I didn't anticipate is quite the level of demand coming out of in particular coming out of the hospital, and at the level at which it is. So whilst we always know there's demand through the hospital, I'm not negating that. I think the numbers this year have been fairly unprecedented, and I couldn't have anticipated that. Whilst we saw a bit of it, we didn't see it to that level.
It'd be interesting to see the modelling for that, if that's possible, the modelling for the last sort of couple of years, and to see if it's how the trend has changed, because I think that will only support what you're saying there, if we can see how that has impacted and the cost of that. But I do think that a lot of the reasons you gave there, we've been sadly living with this for a number of years, haven't we? And I'm just want to make sure that when we're looking at future modelling, that we're taking this and we're learning from what's been happening in this year, so that we are modelling as accurately as we can. Thank you.
Do come in. I just to have a specific question on this. So we couldn't be expected to know that demand in the hospital was going to go up, but could the hospital have been expected to know? Because I don't know what caused that, and so I feel like a recurring theme here is a lot about the relationship between the council and the health side, and this isn't the forum to kind of get into the detail there, but I just wonder the degree to which the health system is conscious of the cost that it might transfer to the council.
I think that's only come through in the last year last 6 months to a year. I think they have just been dealing with it, but dealing with it because it's their problem and they've dealt with it, not necessarily thinking through the wider implications. And I think it's only really, if I'm being honest, and that's no disrespect to anyone, when you've got emergency department, when an ambulance is waiting outside, you are dealing with whatever you're dealing with. I think there is work now ongoing with the hospital in terms of the implications. We've always done it, but there's a much more focus now, because I think it's impacting us across the board. The new neighbourhood health initiative, to come back to where you were previously, that was set out in the 10-year plan, which is much more about how you manage people in their own homes in that acute setting rather than moving people into hospital. So you're identifying, doing more work around population health management to understand those cohorts of people with one or more conditions that have had one or two admissions into hospital. It's about how we use our data better. We've historically not done that well. How can we manage that cohort in the community rather than them always being admitted into hospital and therefore the costs increasing? So I think the neighbourhood health work, we're one of the 43 pathfinders for neighbourhood health, is one of the ways in which we can start to work in a better way as a system better and trying to manage people better rather than always defaulting into going into the hospital and then always coming into adult social care. Very early stages of that, but I think that's a positive way forward going forward.
Okay. So we have spent a lot of time on this, which I'm not apologising for, but we will have to move on shortly. So can I leave, because I've got one more question to come in, so can I leave, do you need to say something urgently either? Can I?
Mine was only in response to what Ed had said about whether we should have recognised this, really.
I feel like that has been covered. So
I was just going to say that this year we've got a massive flu epidemic, which we could not have anticipated and so, you know, we do not know what the impact of that will be coming forward down the line, and you know, those are the sort of things that you cannot actually ever plan for.
Okay, Councillor Thomas has the last question. I'm sorry.
I think we have to accept that this is a rhetorical service. There's nothing you're following, and there is very little you can do because the number of patients here. But one thing, and it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, at Youth Harold there are 10 sheltered bungalows plus a warden's bungalow in the middle. I know that because my mother used to be a home help there and work there. I understand that out of those 10, only 3 house people over 65 years old. You see, our forefathers spent a huge sum of money in the 60s building these bungalows in, I think there's at least 7 areas in Herefordshire where they are. Why on earth have we let those bungalows basically go out of our hands? Because, and say it's a hobby or something, there's people that my mother used to look after.
The question is clear. Don't gild the lily. It's a clear question. Let's see what they say.
Right.
Well, the council is not a stockholding authority, so we don't own any sheltered accommodation ourselves. It's owned through the registered providers, housing associations. I can look into the specifics. I don't know the specifics for Youth Harold. I'm happy to look into the specifics, but as an authority, we don't hold our own stock. We are reliant on the registered providers, and we're reliant on them in terms of their eligibility for their schemes. We can do a lot of influence, we can do a lot of negotiation, but ultimately the decision will rest with the registered providers. I can look into the specifics, and I'm happy to do that.
Okay, we're going to, thank you, that was really useful discussion on that. When we talk about work programs, we might want to check that we feel that scrutiny is, because there's so much going on here and we can't get into the detail in this session, and maybe maybe Councillor Crockett's committee is already on. We can talk about that when we get to work programme. So we have only 40 minutes left on the rest of the budget, so we're going to be snappy. And I mean, I think it was absolutely right to spend that time on this, but now we do need to be snappier. The next thing, I'm afraid we're going to look at Councillor Gandhi and Hillary again, is can you give us a brief description of temporary accommodation? Those costs seem to be increasing. What's going on there? What are we doing about it? And I'm looking for hands who might want to ask questions about this even now.
So yes, the demand has risen for temporary accommodation. We are seeing people obviously that's increasing month on month. We have a statutory duty to respond to homelessness. We're proactively working with the registered providers to try and secure more accommodation. We know that there have been delays with some of the releasing some of the stock because of delays in maintenance and repairs, but we are working very hard with them. We have brought more officers into our service to work on prevention, to prevent people needing temporary accommodation. So we try and work, we do lots of things around rent deposit, we'll pay off rent arrears. We really do work really hard to avoid people falling into temporary accommodation. What we have seen is in the last 3 years, the numbers of the number of nights of temporary accommodation we've provided has doubled in the last 3 years. But actually our costs, we've been much more cost effective. I know this might sound slightly counterintuitive, but we have worked really hard so whilst this year we are seeing an overspend, we will be, by the end of the year, we'll have provided over 50,000 nights of temporary accommodation, and the overspend is likely to be around 500,000. 2 years ago, we provided about 43,000 nights of accommodation and our overspend was 1.3 million. So we've worked really hard to try and secure better value for money, working with both the registered providers, with bed and breakfast providers, even with our chain hotels, because quite often we have to rely on chain hotels. So there's a whole raft of work going on, both to prevent people becoming homeless in the first place through different preventative things, but then when people are in temporary accommodation, and no one wants anyone in temporary accommodation, we are trying to secure the most cost-effective way of doing that. And I think I was quite surprised when I saw those figures, that's actually trying to work really hard to secure the best value that we can, recognising that we don't want anyone in temporary accommodation ultimately, but we are, as I say, I want to give the committee assurance or the board assurance that we are working really hard, particularly in that preventative area, to prevent people becoming homeless in the first place.
Okay, I have Councillor Cornthwaite and then Councillor O'Driscoll, and that's all I have on this.
The figures that you give us, Hilary, regarding temporary accommodation, do they include the ones that are in temporary accommodation provided by the likes of Venture? Or if Venture take on a family or people, is that we don't have to think about that one? And because they do those sort of things, do we help make sure that Venture, we help them in other ways? Not saying that we pay everything all their costs, but are we proactive in helping Venture do the work that they're doing?
So the figures I've quoted are what we pay for. Some of that might be provided through accommodation that Venture hold themselves. So, but the figures I've quoted are what we've had to commission because of our statutory duty. We do work very closely with Venture as we work with a number of different organisations, and we have an ongoing relationship with them, and that is reciprocal in terms of how we work, not just in terms of homeless, but across adults and children's services as well.
Councillor O'Driscoll.
Thank you. Some figures came out at the Housing Development Working Group meeting earlier this week, which was that last year's temporary accommodation was something like 49,000 nights, and we're already at 51,000 for this year. Are we even close to meeting the increase in demand, let alone starting to reduce it? It feels by all the interventions that we're putting into place with, additional social housing, for instance, because it feels like at the moment we're trying to. The ship's going down. We've got a leaky hull and we've got a leaky bucket, and we're only heading one way.
I'm not sure I like to be described as a leaky bucket, but anyway, that's
certainly wasn't you, Hilary. Certainly wasn't you.
I think it's a real challenge for us. I mean, adult social care is a challenge. I think temporary accommodation is a challenge. We're meeting with the registered providers this week, and again, it's at the forefront of the work with them to try and bridge that gap, if you like. Try and, I can't see I can't see it being resolved in the short term. This is a long-term action plan with the registered providers and others to meet that gap. As I say, we're constantly looking at different ways in which we can work in different ways with people at risk of becoming homeless. We do a lot of preventative. We even do that early prevention work through Talk Community before we even, before anyone's even at that point of approaching housing. I think I'm not sure, whilst the Renters' Rights Act has now come in, I think we might see some more demand come through as a result of that, whilst that, I don't have the answers. Again, any recommendations from the board would be very
Absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things we've seen this week is there was a piece on BBC Hereford and Worcester about the number of empty homes around both in both counties, and I think, while yes, we need to build homes, yes, we need to renovate homes, but if there's empty homes that could be brought up to speed a lot quicker, then these kind of interventions and putting our resources into these kind of interventions, prioritising our capital expenditure so that we're dealing with pressures on the revenue budget, which I think we're going to come to in more detail in a bit, would seem to me a no-brainer. Would you agree?
Yes, and sorry, I didn't mention the empty homes work. We've got empty homes officers that do work to source who owns properties and to work with them to get them, to release them back, either sell them or, some that we've been able to work with them, they've rented them and we've been able to use that for temporary accommodation. So that is work we're doing and we will continue to do it.
Councillor Fagan?
Yeah, thank you. Just on that point, nationally there seem to be a lot of forces properties that are empty, and I wonder if that's been explored in Herefordshire in terms of armed forces properties that may be standing empty.
We're not in that situation in Herefordshire. We don't have that accommodation standing empty, and in fact a number of the armed forces are using private rented accommodation, so that also brings a pressure on us as well.
I think that's one. So we're looking at the spend basically, and that's what we've covered. It's clear that this is another of these quite complicated issues. There's what Hilary and Councillor Gandhi are experiencing is sort of downstream of what's happening in the wider housing market. We only have some levers that we pull them out. So again, when we come to thinking about our work programme, we might want to think about making sure that Scrutiny is kind of being helpful in that helping Cabinet in that complicated area, I think. Okay, we're doing all right as long as we keep focused. The third big area of revenue that we wanted to look at was send transport. Is there anybody here who can speak with authority about why, having it's the same sort of story, send transport has we allocated more money to it and it's gone up. Who is, just out of it, because I know it sits as its own budget line, who is the Cabinet member who is accountable for send transport? Right.
It falls within Councillor Powell's remit as well, but the work to reduce the amount is sitting with Councillor Price's portfolio, so it crosses over two different directorates, really.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
If I can just provide some detail on the in-year position. So we have reported an overspend in home to school and SEN transport. At the point where we set the budget, we do that. It's evidence-based. It has to be realistic and based on activity data at that point in time, considering expected growth. What we know across the country is that this is a national issue, and to a certain extent, some of this is outside of our control. We have to respond to the activity, and that in this financial year tends to emerge at an exponential rate with the autumn term, which starts in September. So at the time that we set the budget, around about November, December, we review the activity data at that point, but that's a considerable time away from that autumn term. And this year in the county and nationally, there has been exponential increases in the number of students, children and young people requiring these services. You'll remember in the budget for 25-26, we highlighted a Chief Executive commissioned review of home to school transport services, and the transport team and service team education teams have worked collaboratively with finance throughout the year to challenge some of those individual contracts, to review the journeys, to work with route planning software, to bring all of that together. And as you can imagine, with a delicate market in the county, that has been a challenging process. We have a savings target in 25-26 of £500,000. We stretched that target following the first stage of that review, and we are on track to deliver those savings in year, and that's a saving on the original budget that was set, the activity data and costs at the point of setting the budget. That review is still underway, and as we move through and have some success in the initial stages, we are further looking to work with schools to look at different routes, joining up passengers and considering improving independence at the same time. So that will move through into phase 2, and I think you will see some additional savings as we go through to the 26-27 budget, recognising the developments that we've had in this area.
Councillor Stark wants to come in, but I'm going to let Councillor Fagan come in if she wants to.
Yeah, thank you. Just the term a delicate market, if you could just sort of extrapolate on that a little bit. And I then had a question about the fleet. Because we had a conversation about sort of creating our own fleet so that we could deal with that, and also the work on with using community transport schemes, if that's come to anything.
Thank you. So by delicate market, I mean, nationally this is reported that, there are challenges within contracts with taxi firms. So that's what I was referring to in this area. In terms of the council's own transport fleet, in the 25-26 capital programme, we included an amount that was intended to support to the findings of the review in terms of purchasing our own fleet of vehicles. The review has identified that the best way for us to do that would be a lease model rather than buying ourselves. So that will come forward in the 26-27 proposals. So we will still have opportunities to take on some of those routes ourselves, but that will not be through a purchased vehicle model. And that's because that's been deemed the most cost-effective way.
Thank you. If I can just ask about the taxi drivers, etc. Are we working with the taxi industry in Herefordshire, and are we kind of giving them additional support to sort of provide a better service as such?
Yep, absolutely. We're working very closely with the taxi firms across the county. We've had some good productive conversations, some healthy challenges you'd expect from our end around those costs. But I think those conversations have been productive and we've achieved some savings through that source. Lots of work still to go, and we'll continue to have those conversations and drive through the best value in those contracts.
Councillor Stark?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Going back to the impact on budget setting here, and I don't mind whether it's the leader or Councillor Price who answers. Are both of you satisfied that with the outcome that we've reached in Q2, that everything has been done to keep this budget under control? And second, what does it mean for the impact for budget setting in 26-27?
Thank you, Councillor Stark. So what we've seen over the few years is the increase in demand of this requirement. So we are reacting to the fact that, and this is not just us, this is across the country, there's been an increase in the demand for this service. So it was a situation that we needed to manage, and we were acutely aware that it needed management. So we've had a strategic approach to addressing this issue in lots of different ways. One of them is meeting with the taxi organisations to work through how it is that we can improve the service and get best value for money. That's been an ongoing conversation, and I myself am meeting with representatives from the taxi community this week, coincidentally, to understand fully the issues that they want to raise with me. But our officers have been in discussions with them for considerable time now as an initiative to improve the way these services are run, and they're done on a sustainable model moving forward. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, but all of the briefings I've had on this matter is that it's a complicated situation. It involves personal circumstances, it involves the location of the children, where they need to go, and it's understanding how we can maintain that service and make proper savings and be efficient in the way that we transport children is a big puzzle that needs many different things to happen and negotiate and sort out for us to improve the situation and, as I say, make it a sustainably funded service moving forward. So I'm confident that all of that is in process so that we can reduce those costs, rationalise those costs, but still maintain the council's responsibilities in terms of that.
But are you confident you will be able to come up with a realistic budget forecast for the budget setting for 26-27? It's almost the same problem as with adult social care, that as a council, what you don't want and what we don't want as council members is to have in-year pressures emerging if we can actually get the budget setting better, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think what would probably be helpful for Scrutiny Management Board, I mean, they may want to make this a recommendation, but what we can provide to Scrutiny Management Board is our strategic approach to addressing this issue.
Councillor O'Driscoll has a follow-up question, so we'll let him ask that first, and then that will be it.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise in advance if this is something that has been explored, but as far as Send Travel is concerned, I know some counties, I think Leicestershire and Oxfordshire, they offer personal travel budgets as a first option, and I think they save about £7,500 per pupil. Is that something we do? Is it something we can do? Is it something we're exploring?
Yes, it is something we do. Yes, it is something we're exploring further to maximise, putting the needs of the child first.
How many pupils roughly take advantage of that? Do we know? Is it a new thing, or is it something we're looking to roll out?
Not a new thing. I don't have those figures to hand, but I can get them to you.
Do you want to say the thing you wanted to say before?
Yes, please. Councillor Stark and Councillor O'Driscoll have raised the question a couple of times now on different topics around a realistic budget and how do we make sure that is adequate. And it's really, really challenging. Of course, we want to make sure that the budget is not too much, but equally it has to be sufficient to fund the cost of service delivery. And more importantly, the process goes through a number of different channels for challenge. So it goes through Cabinet, through Corporate Leadership Team, Scrutiny Management Board, external and internal audit, and then finally approval at full council. So how do we make sure that the budget is realistic, adequate, robust? Well, it's got to be linked to the evidence available at the time and informed by trend analysis and anticipation of future growth. And that's where the real challenge lies, particularly in this complex, volatile area for home to school transport, SEN transport, and also for adult social care. We do not have a tool that enables us to predict demand far enough in advance to make sure that we can fully anticipate that activity data. But what we do have is really strong links between the finance teams and the service teams that are closest to these service users. And we join up that data, look at trend analysis, consider that change between budget setting and the September academic term, or that spike in demand for adult social care across the Q1 and Q2 months. We join all of that up together and we try to make the most realistic estimate of the cost required to deliver services for a certain proportion of users at that point in time. And that is a very thorough process, but it has to be evidence-based at the time that we set the budget for it to be realistic, robust, adequate.
Oh, it'll have to be, we're running, we've only got 20 minutes to go and there's quite a lot to fit in.
Chair, I just wanted to point out that actually both you and I were told that we would be kept abreast of this this issue, and we haven't been, and I think that it is something that we just need to flag in terms of either task and finish or some sort of piece of work, because it's not currently it's not within the children young people scrutiny work programme, and it's, as far as I know, it's not being covered by any other work programme. So I feel we just need to sort of elevate the priority of it.
Okay, so we've only got 20 minutes left on this section. We've got plenty to cover. I there are a couple of things we could get into in terms of corporate and transformation, but I'm just going to pick one because I think it chimes a lot with some of the work the committee is doing parallel to the budget setting, and so and picks up on some of the things that Hilary talked about, which is the issue of doing things differently in the council, and I think this is a sort of political question about, do we understand what we as councillors at sort of governance level could and should be doing to enable our managers to do things differently? One of the things that did strike me when Hilary was talking about taking these very different approaches was that there is some level of risk inherent in doing that. And so how is the cabinet sending signals that we accept and encourage some level of risk, but on the other hand, we don't want people to go off and spend lots of money. So how is the cabinet thinking about the culture that the council has around transformation, doing things differently, and what it can be doing to help set that culture?
Well, I'll pick up. I mean, there's many things that 53 members could be doing, and I think, I mean, the context. I mean, really, what I should have said really at the start of the meeting. I think the context is that we're looking at trying to make more savings than we've ever done before. The most I think we've done in 1 year is £19 million of savings. We're looking at nearly double that, and so we really have to transform the way we provide services on every level. There's advantages to doing that because, with adult social care, there's a huge amount of innovation in terms of how we care for people, how people are monitored in their homes to give them the support they need. That technology did not exist 5 years ago, and you know how quickly technology is moving. There are apps and there are sensors and there are all these things now that can come in and help people and support them and give them care and assurance and that confidence that 5-10 years ago didn't even exist. So there's lots of positives, but we've got to grasp that nettle, that technology, those processes, AI, all of these applications at a quick pace to make sure that we're taking all of the advantages of that progress, whilst we're having to make lots and lots of savings. Transformation is a word that's quite elastic. It can be stretched to mean lots of different things, but there's many ways in which a council can transform to improve services. And I'm happy to say that transformation in the form of changing the way we deliver services is happening at pace. We relied on it to create lots of savings when we weren't fully engaged in the transformation that needed to happen. We're doing that now, so that's in progress, and that's going to make a great, strides in that. But I think members really have to focus on what it is that is the core function of the council and make sure that we stick to making sure that those services are sustainable in the long term. There are many things that a council can do, but there are certain things we are statutorily obliged to do to carry out those services. And we have to focus on making sure that we're delivering those services as financially prudently as possible. That's the focus of it. I am asking directors, all senior management team, to make sure that they're focused on, are we delivering the services with the resources we need? Is there any way we can reduce those that cost of that resource? And Councillor Gandhi and Director for Adults alluded to it earlier on. We've had meetings where I have questioned, can we do this in a different way? How many people do we need to do this role? Is there resourcing we can do that stretches the pound in all kinds of ways? And we've got to keep that pressure on. But I would like to say to everyone to keep that pressure on while we're fully focused on the services that we must deliver. Because if we don't do that, and we've got a great track record of doing that, if we don't do that, then we're going to be affecting the most vulnerable people in our society. So that's where we must keep laser focused on that.
Okay, we've only got 15 minutes left. We do want to pick up reserves, savings and treasury management, but I'm going to park that because I know members will want to talk about the capital programme. So we're going to talk about the capital programme. If there is time, we will come back to those other revenue things. Councillor Stark already has his hand up. I'm looking at Councillor O'Driscoll. I imagine he has questions on the capital programme.
Leader, every year we set a capital programme which seems rather optimistic, and it's something that is almost cyclical or cyclical. Is there not a need for a change here where we start to look at the capital programme we want to achieve for a year and be more realistic? Even with this capital programme at Q2, I think we're down to about 112 million want to deliver or something along those lines. So first of all, the question is, are we actually setting capital programmes that are achievable? And that depends again on the methodology by which we're arriving at that. And second, Leader, do we actually have the capacity within the council to deliver this sort of size of capital programme that we set each year? Because you have talked about savings, you've talked about transformation. I can see how that can affect the revenue side, but obviously with capital programmes, they're individual projects often that require individual skills, particularly specialist skills. And I just feel that rather than always having to face this so-called underspending capital, that there needs to be maybe a look at whether we've got the methodology right and whether we've got the capacity to deliver what we're trying to deliver. That's my two areas of concern, Leader.
Just before you come in, Councillor Driscoll, do you want to add to that, or are you happy to?
I think I could probably happily add an additional question to Councillor Stark's two-prong question that will naturally flow and save us all a bit of time, which is prioritisation of capital projects on top of what he said then. How do we prioritise the capital projects that are going to get all of the energy and resources and capacity of officers? Are we prioritising those capital projects that will have the most impact on the revenue budget? What I mean by that is things like, building affordable housing, building social housing, one example, which is close to my heart, and I know many of my fellow councillors. Are we prioritising those kind of initiatives, or are we prioritising, with the greatest respect, sometimes flagship projects that are more, that do take a lot of resources, but are actually not going to save any money at the end of the day off the revenue budget, or highly unlikely to save very much? Things like Shire Hall, for instance.
A nice simple question for you to pick up, Leader.
Okay, yeah, good questions. Even before I go back to all the capital programmes that I can think about that the council's been doing for the last 10 years, I suppose. Go back. The timelines for those capital project delivery, they change because of certain factors, certain things that come on that interfere with the process. When you bid for things, it's determined, the time frame for that is determined by the contractor, who's involved, who can say they can do the work. So there's lots of moving parts to this. So I think it would be very difficult to prioritise certain schemes over others when the timetables of individual schemes are affected by so many different factors. One of the things that I wanted to make as a priority for some capital projects was where by delivering that capital project, then it would take the heat out of the revenue pressure. And a good example of that is addressing temporary accommodation, and that's why we were really wanting to get the purchase of the John Venn building, because the cost of providing temporary accommodation, which we've already touched on, has a revenue implication for the council, but using its capital powers, if I can put it, the muscle behind the capital ability to get capital assigned to buy buildings so that we can provide that provision. There's a good example, but you don't prioritise that ahead of everything else because the council's wanting to achieve so many different things in one go. And I think it would be the wrong strategy to just say, well, we're just going to prioritise that scheme, because what would happen is anything holding up that scheme would then hold up all the other schemes that you've put behind that priority. So with a council, you have to do many things at the same time, because there's so many things that the council needs to and wants to do. So in terms of prioritisation, I don't think that would be right, but it is right to have projects that alleviate the revenue pressures, especially those that the council must provide, like temporary accommodation. Achievable. There's lots of expertise within the council that delivers services and delivers projects, but we also rely on other organisations, partners, people who we rely on to deliver projects. That is a blend as well. There's lots of things that the council does well, but we need expertise from outside. So it's a blend of doing what we can do in-house, and then we have to refer to experts in their field elsewhere. So it's always a blended approach. There's not a, we can do it all, so we're all doing it in-house, or we can't do any of it, so we're doing it by relying on outside organisations. It's a blend of that, and I think it's right to have that blend. I think in an ideal world, you'd want all of the projects to be on time, on budget, coming out at a great rate of knots, but the world in reality is just not that simple. So we have to continually react to events and adjust our strategies accordingly. And you will always get that. And it's how you manage that situation that's important, rather than trying to set up a system where that never happens because you've got everything right.
Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Stark started, so he can ask the
It's
first
just that
supplementary.
last point. I mean, I asked, how do you go about setting a realistic capital programme for the year? I can understand, Leader, the pressures that go on within the year and how project timescales may slip. But it just seems to me, and I've been here 6 years now, and we've set 6 capital programmes we've never achieved. And I just wonder whether there's a lesson to be learnt by whether we're being over-optimistic when we set these capital programmes at the beginning of the year.
Well, I think the council as a collective, because the capital programme is approved by full council. I think we've been right to be ambitious. We've got the right programmes in the scheme. We're addressing our responsibilities. So I think we're doing the right things. But it just goes back to the point I made earlier, which is these issues are really challenging. I mean, we've now. The transport hub is underway. It's being built as we speak. We're starting with Ross Enterprise Park. That's a long-term ambition of this council, as far as I'm aware, to have economic growth in a different area of Herefordshire. We've invested heavily in the Hereford Enterprise Zone, and that's been a real success. But we want to invest in other places in Herefordshire because we want growth everywhere possible. That's happening. That's a real positive. We've invested in our capital programme in terms of our road maintenance. That was very ambitious, but it was the right thing to do because that was the right way of doing proper asset management, so that we're not always being reactive with our revenue spend. So these are major projects that are being done, and the road resurfacing projects that we've done over the last 2 years that have had a real impact has been done in-house with a great team and a great partnership with our partners who've delivered that road resurfacing. So all of those are really positive. And I think given the context of how much the council has to achieve on a daily basis, we're doing pretty good.
I'm going to bring Councillor Driscoll in a minute. This is for us to think about in the work programme. I feel like every quarter we sit here and we say, well, you've been overly ambitious with your capital programme, and the Cabinet say, no, we've just been ambitious with our capital programme, and these are things, and we keep having that same conversation without it going anywhere. I think we need to think about how we can change that conversation. So either we become convinced by the Cabinet's arguments, or we convince them somehow differently. But I don't want to be sitting here in quarter 3 having the same conversation again about that. So we need to think about how we can change that conversation. Councillor O'Driscoll.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Leader, for your response. I just want to go into that a little bit more. You said in an earlier answer that we're having to face the biggest cuts this council has ever known, and you said double the 19 million it's done previously. I think I might just want to drill into that figure a little bit more, because all of a sudden 38 million seems a lot more than 27 million, but it would be interesting to hear that. When we're faced with those kind of cuts because of the pressures across the board, a lot of which we've spoken about at length in the earlier part of this meeting, while yes, we have to, as a council, work on lots of different areas and bring lots of different projects to fruition, if the house is on fire, you put the fire out first. And it feels to me as if we're not putting our energy and our efforts into the right areas at the present time. Short-term embarrassment might be called for in order to make sure we address the real problems which we were talking about the earlier part of this meeting, which is most definitely accommodation, social housing and temporary accommodation. And I think we could be doing a lot more to try and relieve the pressures on the budget, and I hope the Leader and the Cabinet will take that on board.
That sounds more like a draft recommendation than a question to me. Could you just clarify the discussion about savings and...
So, I mean, I'll just finish off by the difficulty is we're really waiting for the 19th of December, where there'll be the final government settlement. So then we will understand the final picture that we're presented with. We did a forecast in September and it was 27 million, but we've heard varying reports about what the actual figure will end up being. But it's going to be a considerable amount of savings that we'll need to find, whether it's 27 million or it's 30 million or it's 35 million, we will know soon enough. But I think the point is, in comparison to previous savings and in comparison to previous settlements, this will be a huge challenge for the council. And we're in a financially robust position and we've got really good, sound financial management. And so I'm confident that we will carry on and do well in our financial management. But I just want to make all members aware, not just Scrutiny Management Board, but all members aware that the financial challenging picture that we're presented with to solve is something the likes of which we haven't been there before. But in terms of our financial management and the way we're wanting to deliver, last year, we delivered £74 million worth of capital programme. That's the highest ever. And now we're forecasting for this year, it's going to be 112 million. So when I say we're doing quite well, let's not underplay what it is that we've achieved last year and why we want to be ambitious this year.
So we're nearly finished on this, but if you could just clear up those figures for us.
Yeah, if I can just say that there is continuing uncertainty over the council's funding arrangements for 26-27, and largely that's driven by the fact that the total quantum for distribution has not yet been confirmed by central government. In the MTFS that was approved for 25-26, we identified a cost pressures, including growth in demand, inflation, etc., of 25 million. In-year budget monitoring highlights challenges, cost pressures in year of 7 million. So obviously we are seeing more than we anticipated in terms of that demand and cost, as we've already discussed at length through this meeting. So until we understand the final funding position, and that will be communicated to us next week, hopefully towards the end of next week, that's when our specific allocations from central government will be determined. Information released over the last couple of weeks through the policy statement and the budget has varying amounts. And again, it comes back to the fact that that total quantum that will be distributed has not yet been confirmed. In the policy statement, it was highlighted that recovery grant would be provided in the same allocations as in 25-26 to certain councils. What that does is that takes away £600 million from the total pot that will be distributed across all local authorities. Herefordshire Council was not in receipt of recovery grant last year, so what that means is the total pot that will be shared amongst all local authorities is £600 million lighter. And our modelling advisors and funding advisors, we are working very closely with them almost on a daily basis at the moment to understand the specific implications for this council of the Fair Funding Review.
Thank you very much for that. Just to clear up one statement that the leader made, you said that the largest savings you'd ever made were 19 million, but I think strictly speaking, the savings target was 19 million, but 11 or 12 of that, which is still a very large amount of money, was made recurrently, and then the rest fell into this year, and you're on target to make all but 1.4 million of that is at risk. Is that's a very nerdy thing, but I'm challenging. Since Councillor Harvey isn't here to bring that up.
Very grateful for your challenge in her absence. Yes, last year we did not deliver the full savings target recurrently. However, we did mitigate in year by identifying efficiencies and cost reductions in other areas, and that's the right thing to do when you cannot deliver savings recurrently. And we know that in a challenging financial climate, with the increases in demand and complexity of care that we are experiencing, some of the areas where we did not deliver savings recurrently, for example in the community wellbeing budget, were for that very reason. It's really difficult to transform and make cost efficiencies whilst at the same time managing increases in demand and complexity of care.
Thank you very much. We are actually slightly over where we want to be. I'm happy to allow just another couple of minutes, especially if Councillor Bartlett wanted to ask anything about Treasury management. I wouldn't want to let that opportunity go past.
Thank you, Chair. Not specifically, because I know Councillor Stark was interested in the MRP. Failure to articulate properly at the last SMB, I do still have some concerns about our CRF position, which is related to the MRP. And it strikes me that our capital ceiling on that is we're quite high to the ceiling that we can have on our CRF. And I'll let Councillor Stark actually talk about the implications of that on the MRP.
In the briefing, section 151, obviously we looked at cash flow implications and we looked at the MRP. I just really want to have reassurance for this board that we're not going to have a cash flow crisis in the council because of the DSG, and I should say dedicated schools grant for those looking in, overhang, and also the implications for some of the very heavy capital programme projects that we've got, that the MRP is going to be actually not continuing or increasing pressure on the revenue budget at a time when we've all been talking about the other pressures on the revenue budget. And this is where, Chair, we still have this issue about the linkage between the capital programme and the revenue budget, and whether we actually know enough about what those linkages are and the impact they're having. Okay, thank you.
Just as a prelude to your answer, could you unpick some of the acronyms that were thrown around there, so we all know what we're talking about?
Sorry, CRF is capital financing requirement.
And MRP is minimum revenue provision.
Thank you. So I think I'll tackle two separate questions. So firstly, minimum revenue provision, MRP, is a charge to the revenue budget linked to our capital expenditure. And I think 2 years ago, we undertook a review of the minimum revenue provision charge with our Treasury management advisors. And at that time, a special training session was provided to members of Scrutiny Management Board. So I'm really happy to put that in place again through our Treasury advisors. I think that would be really useful. So that review made sure that we are making the most efficient minimum revenue provision charge to the revenue budget within the regulations, but also a number of councils who are failing financially are because they haven't set aside adequate minimum revenue provision. So it's a fine balance between making sure you make an efficient charge, but one that is within the required eligibility criteria, etc. The minimum revenue provision and our interest payable budgets are set through the central budget budget line. So we have the 4 directorates and then a directorate summary, and then the MRP and interest payable budgets are set within that central services line. And again, that's very closely linked to the capital programme, including planned slippage and an assessment of the point in each quarter that we will need to undertake external borrowing. So it's a robust estimate in that central services line. To come back to cash flow, in this financial year, one of the things that I set myself a target to do is to improve our cash flow monitoring and to strengthen the link specifically between our day-to-day cash flow requirement and the needs of the capital programme, recognising, as the leader has already highlighted, that this is a year of accelerated capital expenditure. We are a lowly borrowed council, but recognising that the impact of our debt position, a 10-month profile, of collecting council tax and business rates, the normal BAU expenditure has a complex kind of arrangement together, and we do now consider our cash flow through a different lens. I have regular meetings with the Treasury team on a 2-weekly basis at key intervals throughout the month, and we bring in the aged receivables requirements, the aged payable requirements, payroll. We have a daily cash flow forecast that identifies when our need to borrow will occur, and we work closely with our brokers and our Treasury advisors to plan ahead and determine what the best route to satisfy those cash flow requirements will be, minimising our reliance on external borrowing and maximising our use of internal borrowing to reduce that impact on the revenue budget from interest payable.
And that's the point, section 151, officer. As our cash flow position is getting tighter, then there'll be an impact to the MRP, because we'll have to look for external borrowing, won't we, rather than internal borrowing?
Well, the MRP is linked to the capital spend. The interest payable is linked to the external borrowing.
Right.
So we, when setting the budget for 25-26, we anticipated a need to borrow. And if you'll remember this time last year, there was significant challenge around our Treasury interest receivable forecast, and was it too low? And we knew at that point that the cash balances would reduce this year. The Treasury Management Appendix that goes with the quarterly budget monitoring report confirms that cash balance is reducing, and my cash monitoring to the end of this financial year confirms that will continue to reduce, and we will need to undertake external borrowing before the 31st of March. That was anticipated, and the interest payable impact of that has been included in the 25-26 revenue budget, and the required borrowing for 26-27, not just to service the capital programme, but also to manage the impact of the dedicated schools grant, shortfall in funding and expenditure, and the day-to-day requirements of the council spend, including, for example, in capital expenditure, the impact of VAT, which has a cash implication. We spend more and then recover it at a later point in time. All of that is factored into the 26-27 budget, but the MRP specifically is linked to the CapEx, capital expenditure, and not directly linked to the interest payable.
Thank you.
Okay. Very, very, very quickly. We're well into our break.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you again for offering training and a detailed explanation. But my basic worry about the capital financial requirement, I might have got this completely wrong, is that it is a ceiling that we cannot hit. We have a ceiling of 378 million. We are at 300 and some very close to it, 335. And when you go to the government guidelines on MRP and CFR, the MRP charge must be calculated with respect to all capital expenditure financed by debt. The appropriate measure for this is CFR. That is a complete measure of all capital expenditure that has not yet been funded by either capital or revenue resources, and will include capital expenditure financed by external borrowing, internal borrowing, and credit arrangements. So my worry is with we've just talked about needing to borrow. We've talked about being under borrowed, but I worry that we're stacking up our capital that we haven't allocated to the MRP. Do you understand what I mean? It's like we're carrying a debt that we're not servicing yet, and when we hit the ceiling, there doesn't seem to be any plan B according to the government.
Okay, this sounds like something where we probably need to get into the detail in another forum, but is there anything you can say in 1 minute that will provide some assurance to the committee right now? And then we will look into some training and a more detailed discussion.
Yep, absolutely, and really happy to put that training in place or provide a dedicated briefing myself. The capital financing requirement is measured as part of our prudential indicators. We measure that on a quarterly basis. The report that you have at Q2 and for every quarter preceding that, including previous financial years, identifies that we are compliant within that prudential indicator. So that's the assurance that I'm providing to you today.
Okay, but I think it clearly is increasing and of increasing importance. So I think some we'll take forward how we can get the committee more into that detail. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for that session. I found it really useful. There clearly are a lot of cost pressures in year. There are going to be a lot of pressures next year. I think we've heard that the Cabinet is aware of those, and we might make some recommendations to further that. We're going to take a, I'm looking at the time now, we're going to take a break and be back at 11:55. Then we will have a short session on the delivery plan. Then we will talk about recommendations. Then we will talk about the work programme. So if Cabinet members were able to stay for the session on the delivery plan, that would be very helpful. So that if you could be back at 11:55 for 20 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back to anyone watching the live stream or the recording. We are going to have a quick session looking at the Q2 performance report. We identified a small number of lines of inquiry, so I'm expecting that this will not take too long. Does anybody want to kick us off? Councillor Stark asked a question at Council about outcomes. Do you want to follow up on that at all, or was that enough for you?
Well, it'd be useful to have reassurance from the leader that the Cabinet or the administration is going to look at the RAG status and see what it would look like if it was an outcomes-based performance plan, then focus as it is mainly on activity. Thank you.
Well, it was just the point I made at Friday's council. It goes through the analysis and the spectrum of it goes through the prism of outcomes based at the end when we're assessing the delivery of the year.
So I wonder, and I put this to you to see what you think. So I wonder if part of unlocking the kind of enabling managers to do things differently is for councillors to focus more on the outcomes and less on the specific tasks. And I recognise that there's a tension there, because there's a risk that if you turn up and say we're going to deliver all these outcomes next year, we're going to say where's the plan. But do you think that that is something that might be helpful if we had more emphasis on outcomes and less on the specifics?
Yeah, and I'd be if that's going to be your recommendation, I think that would be really helpful for us to consider. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm looking for any hands on delivery plan. I have a couple of things I'm very interested in. Councillor Bartlett.
Thanks. Yeah, just on the delivery plan. Well, there's two. There's a kind of conflict in the narrative about the nutrient management plan in the document being published, and then in the table we've got before us saying delays with the Environment Agency have resulted in the nutrient management plan delivery being delayed. But I couldn't find the actual nutrient management plan on the website, so some clarity about that. But my main thing really is, I mean, we've covered the ICB and the transition from the Section 75 pressures, but we've also, I've noticed, in a lot of our property investments and our property investment strategy, is an area where we've got constant drift again. You know, we've got Charhall costs and start dates seem to be still drifting a little bit more than we wanted to. And now that we note now that we won't have our initial costs in December, we will have our initial costs in December 25, whereas we were hoping to have had them, our initial costs, a lot earlier. And then again, of course, in the property investments of our estates and schools programmes, you know, we've got a number of projects that are still tracking behind, and this area is one that feels to me, because we've obviously done the commercialisation work as well, feels to me there's still some kind of drift that we haven't got a hold of. And I mean, from personal experience, thinking about a couple of property assets in Leominster where they're empty, they can't be let, and they can't be given back because of work that needs to be done. So it's a vicious circle. And it feels to me that on the back of that commercialisation work that S&B were looking at earlier in the year, that we still don't quite have a grip on our own property portfolio. And of course that now includes the Big Ben's building, it includes Buttercross, and issues that we haven't quite sorted out with those. So that to me is a big area of concern still.
Okay, could you turn that into a question that the leader could address?
When are we going to get a grip on the property services budget? Are we constantly pushing our own property portfolio down the road when it comes to maintenance and getting the most from our asset base.
Okay, there's a couple of things there, Chair. When somebody says, you haven't got a grip, or challenges you to where you haven't got a grip, I'd really like a specific example. You can say the soup is cold, but what soup, whose soup, and how long has it been there? So specifics would
Councillor
help.
Bartlett did have some specifics
So
in
with-
Correct. I did
Leominster of
mention
all
the
places.
Ben's building and the Buttercross.
Yeah, so with the Buttercross, there's some really exciting things happening there, and we were updating the town council about that. Since the last update of the town council, I haven't got a briefing, but I will make sure that you get a briefing on exactly where we are with the Buttercross. It was a good idea to purchase it, and there are some exciting plans for it. So that's really positive, and I'm pleased about that. So that, I think, we'll get you a briefing on specifics. So if there's any concern any councillor has, whether it's in their ward or just generally, about how we're progressing with the fate of a particular property, then please by all means find out, because I've been dealing with certain buildings that the council owns recently that come to mind, and resolving the issues that are with those buildings is a complex one. So it's not something that you can just deal with overnight. But with regard to our property portfolio, in considering how best we use our assets, I've asked for officers to make sure that we do a proper audit of how we're using all of our buildings, how many we've got. I mean, we know this, but how many we've got and how best we're using those buildings to achieve the aims and outcomes and aspirations of the council. That work is being done. Cabinet will be briefed on that shortly, but can I just if I could just give you that assurance that how we use our buildings, are we using them well enough, and how we could best use them, is a project that I've already asked the officers investigate, and we're working through that, and I will get an update on that next week.
That's good to hear. There's one thing I don't know if it would be appropriate to include in that, and you may have included it. I'm interested in the question of other people's buildings, and alongside, so there's how well we're using our property, but there's also is us owning this asset or using this asset as opposed to someone else's? Is that the best way to deliver service? So will that form part of that discussion as well?
The task that I've set is specifically about our buildings and about how we use our buildings, but in terms of how the community, how people in Herefordshire, how different organisations use their buildings, and are they being best used for the benefit of society, I think is a really great question to ask. And if you want to put that as a recommendation for the council to turn its mind to what it thinks other buildings should be used for, then by all means, then maybe that's a recommendation you want to consider. I think we just have to be slightly careful, though, that we can't spend too much time worrying about all the other buildings in Herefordshire. But I know that there is pressure on housing, there are empty properties, there are properties above shops, all of that best use of those properties could really help Herefordshire in lots of different ways. But I just think we have to be realistic about how far we go beyond the scope of what is not in our direct control.
I think that's right. I mean, I won't name them, but I have in my mind a conversation I had with a large voluntary sector organisation that we commission services with, that wants to access funding to develop properties that might be a benefit to our services, or might be a benefit. And I'm just in my head, that sort of links to the challenge from the Corporate Peer Challenge about stronger partnership working in the voluntary sector, and just thinking beyond kind of it's our asset or it's someone else's asset, in thinking a bit more sort of it's the county's asset. That's the sort of thing I'm thinking. But let's see if we can frame a recommendation around that. Councillor Crockett.
Yeah, just a simple request, really. I just wonder if we can each quarter performance pie chart in one place. So for a visual, I would like to be able to see the last quarters as well as this quarter's, and then going on. So at the end of the year, we've got 4 pie charts for each performance, such as people, etc., so that we can see which way the colours have gone, just as a visual in one place, please.
Happy to take that away and think about how we can do that better. While I've got the mic, if I can just respond to Councillor Bartlett's challenge about the Buttercross and the other buildings in Leinster. In the narrative detail that's included in the Q2 performance report, it highlights that those projects are both underway, and the RAG status in the supporting delivery plan confirms that they are green at Q2.
Councillor Fagan.
Thank you. It's just a quick question about alternative provision. So we can see in the performance report that we're behind in terms of alternative provision. As far as I understand, there are capital elements and revenue elements to that, and it is something that I do want to add to the Children Young People's work programme, Scrutiny work programme. Alternative provision, but do these delays are they at risk then, the provision of alternative support for children at risk in the next budget?
That's a really difficult question. Ultimately, the answer has to be yes. Any reduction in our plans for provision has an impact on the revenue budget. What I would say is accelerating that increase in sufficiency is a key council priority. It's one of the biggest financial risks to the council. So there are some complex reasons why those 2 projects within the delivery plan are identified as teal at Q2, and I'm happy. I think if the cabinet member and relevant officer was here, they'd be able to provide you that detail. So I think we can commit to providing that, but rest assured that this is a key priority, recognising that direct link between the capital delivery and the revenue budget pressures, and of course the link to the dedicated schools grant deficit and the deficit management plan, which I know this committee is really interested in challenging and supporting in order to hold us to account for delivery in year.
Yeah, I think, Chair, it's just something that we need to look at in greater detail through children's scrutiny.
Great. Okay, I have Councillor Cornthwaite, then Councillor Stark, and then I've got a question. I think that will be it on the delivery plan.
Couple of questions, if I may. I think we've only got one red box on the thing, but it happens to be on something that I'm very interested in, which is number of people rough sleeping. Hereford has done a tremendous work in trying to keep people off the streets, and so I just wonder: are they actually in Hereford? The fact that figure's gone up. Are there people that have come in from away that suddenly they were counted on one day? Because there is such a work going on with regard to rough sleeping from all sorts of sectors. And then just on, Rachel mentioned teal, and I was looking at what was happening at Whitecross School with regard to getting land from church commissioners, and could we have an update on that one, please?
Councillor Gandy can take one of those at least.
This would be the figure at any one particular moment in time. It fluctuates massively, and it does increase during the summer months. There's no doubt about it, because people are more likely to sofa surf in winter months, but then they don't sofa surf in the summer months. So on top of that, we have a significant number of people who come in from out of county, and quite often they are on a list in the county they've come from for a housing accommodation. So until they are removed from that list for accommodation, we can't put them onto any list of our own. And then on top of that, we have some migrants who have not actually attained migrant status, and so there is no government money that follows that, and so therefore we can assist them, but we can't actually put them into any temporary accommodation because we get absolutely no funding for them at all. At this moment in time, the winter shelter opened on the 3rd of November. We had 9 people in there on the first night. Now evenings are getting colder, we will have significantly more going in there. And if I look at what happened last year, we had about 50 or so different people that used the night shelter. But at the end of the term, when it ended, which was April of last year, only 5 went back onto the streets. The rest we had worked with to get into temporary accommodation or into the hubs that we've got that support them with addictions, etc. So we are fairly confident that this year will be the same, that we will be able to work with them while they're with us, and that very few, when they come back out again, will return to the streets. I think you have to understand, though, that ultimately some people will not go inside. They prefer to be on the street. We can't force them into night shelters. And also, some people find it really difficult to be in accommodation where there are other people. They wish to be alone, and that is something that is their right.
Can you help with the Wycross School inquiry?
Absolutely can. So at the time of publishing this report and assessing its performance at Q2, it was assessed as teal, as you've highlighted in the report, and that was as a result of some uncertainty around the use of the site linked to the covenants in place. Our legal colleagues have now reviewed those covenants in detail, and we think that that can now be progressed and that the site can be used as planned, so I'd expect a change in that rating in the Q3 performance report.
And finally, apart from maybe I'll ask a question, Councillor Stark.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One area of interest, Leader, to us is the linkage between the delivery plan, the capital programme, the revenue budget, and trying to work it through. If I could take one example, which is the Southern Link Road, which is a huge project. I did notice in the capital programme that the profile of it did seem to have changed over recent times. And I do know that in a delivery plan, you do talk about working through the design phase of it. I'm just interested to know that when you give a green status to something, a delivery plan, how do you pick up that slippage in terms of the capital spend? That's not seen as green then. Is that something that will then be flagged up in 26, 27 and 27, 28? I'm just interested in how this all works through. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stark. I'm not quite fully understanding of the...
Well, you've actually, I think your profile and the spend on the Southern Link Road is 30 million over later years now than you were before.
I think in terms of the delivery plan and the appendix that we include with the quarterly performance report, what we're assessing and attributing a RAG rating to is the key milestone linked to that deliverable. I fully accept that there is a really strong link between the delivery and the capital spend and revenue budget in some instances, and I think that's one area that we can strengthen our performance reporting in future years, bringing in that delivery against the capital programme. But I think in terms of the targets that are in here, they are assessed against the key milestone at the quarterly interval, and significant amount of work and consideration and challenge of that RAG rating takes place before reporting, but I do accept that there could be stronger links to the capital delivery.
And I think we need a recommendation, Chair, but sorry for confusing you, Leader, but that's the point I was getting at. I don't think the RAG status is necessarily the full picture. That's all I'm saying. And if you assume that all this field of green means that everything may be happening on time, both in the capital programme and elsewhere, it's not necessarily the case. That's what you're saying, Section 151, Officer.
I think it's really challenging to bring in and produce on a kind of one-page document risks in the capital programme, performance against the capital programme, revenue budget variances and achievements of key milestones in the delivery plan. And I haven't ever seen a document that successfully brings all that together, and I wish there was a tool that we could press a button and it generates that report for me. But I accept the challenge, and I think there are ways that we can look to improve and strengthen. We've already had some good recommendations from this committee about the presentation, the visual presentation, to enable to see the flow and the achievement through the year through the pie charts in next to each other in a report. So any recommendations gratefully received to strengthen the way that we report this for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stark is even now going to frame that into a recommendation that makes sense outside of this meeting. Okay, I think that's it on delivery plan. I was only 5 minutes longer than I budgeted for. Thank you thank you very much. We're going to spend 20 minutes, a maximum of 20 minutes. If we can get it done quicker, that's fine. Discussing recommendations. The cabinet members and director are welcome to stay, but we won't be upset if you leave at this stage. So, what do we know about recommendations so far, Daniel?
Just give me
Yeah.
Chair, sometimes in connected communities, we stop the stream.
That's a good point.
While we draft the recommendations, then come back on.
Okay, for the purposes of people watching, because this is going to be a bit messy and discussing, we're going to pause the meeting, but we will come back and any recommendations we have, we'll read into the record. Okay, welcome back. We have proposed some recommendations which the Statutory Scrutiny Officer will read into the record.
Thank you very much, Chair. The recommendations of Scrutiny Management Board on the 8th of December 2025 are as follows. 1. Given the Council faces the largest savings requirements in its history, approximately £30 million, the Scrutiny Management Board recommends the Cabinet prioritises capital investment and officer capacity towards projects that deliver the greatest and most immediate relief to the revenue budget. 2. Cabinet adopt a bolder approach to borrowing to deliver capital projects that will relieve pressure on the revenue budget. 3. Council should maximise its relationship with partners to explore the use of property assets when determining its medium-term financial strategy. 4. Cabinet should enable commercialisation in services by focusing on outcomes rather than activity in its performance reporting. 5. There should be more transparency on the red, amber, green status in the performance plan and how that flows through to underlying risks of slippage in the capital programme. And 6, the Executive should intensify its efforts at a strategic level with the Integrated Care Board to ensure that cost pressures on the Board are not transferred to the Council.
Councillor Stark has a question.
Sorry, Chair, I think we should make it clear that the 30 million is for 26-27, because those not in the council might not be aware of that.
We don't know the cost pressure, do we?
No, but it is 26-27 we're talking about, that one.
Yeah.
I think it's implicit.
Okay.
Okay. All those in favour of adopting these recommendations? I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much. I will now turn to our final section, for which I had intended to allocate 30 minutes, and there are now 10. So this is an opportunity to discuss the work programme, not just of the Scrutiny Management Board, but of all the scrutiny committees, and in particular to highlight any areas where, in the basis of emerging from our discussion, we think there should be more activity, or any areas where we think there are gaps, where we're not looking at things collectively as scrutiny, or areas where we're looking at things too much. Councillor Fagan is reaching for her microphone.
Thank you, Chair. I think certainly we need to focus on the home to school transport issue, whether we do that as children and young people scrutiny or if we do it collectively as Scrutiny Management Board, given the pressures. Just to quickly say that the children and young people scrutiny, so we're busy working on our early help task and finish. That's taking up a considerable amount of committee time. We're waiting also for January for the outcome of the ILAC from Ofsted, and the recommendations that will be made from that will definitely inform our work programme going forward. We have got the school capital programme in there, but of increasing priority, I think, is the alternative provision. So we need to look at that. And then we've got some long lists, but possibly some of the issues that are emerged from the Ofsted inspection will include those items on the long list. So we're pretty much waiting for January, but that alternative provision, I think, is one of the priorities that we need to look at, either as a Scrutiny Management Board or specifically children's scrutiny.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Councillor O'Driscoll next, then Councillor Stark, then Councillor Crockett.
Thank you. There's principal two major things. We'll be looking at tourism again, and the tourism strategy and destination management in January, which has been an ongoing. It's been deferred several times, but I think that's important that we do finally look at that. We're also going to be looking at broadband connectivity across the whole county and looking at those harder to reach areas of the county, because there's still many residents who sadly can't get sufficient broadband speed. But two of the major items on the meeting that I think is important is that we intend to scrutinise the year of delivery next year. So we'll be looking at all of the capital projects at the midpoint of the year of delivery in July, and then we'll be looking at it again. I'm proposing in January 2027 at the end of the year of delivery. So I see those as two key milestones, and I think it's important that we look at the capital programme and all of the planned capital delivery projects that are supposed to be coming online throughout 2026, early 2027.
Councillor Stark?
Yes. My committee's looked at flooding in the past, but given what happened in Monmouth and even in Herefordshire again, I am looking at a possible task and finish group on flood risk management, resilience and recovery. We haven't really talked it through with the committee members yet, so it's just an alert for you, just to let you know that we will be looking at that. Coming up, we still wanted to look at land use and management. We've got a number of objectives under that, but I do think that that is a major area for us to scrutinise, because it has so many tentacles to it in terms of its impact on things like the state of the rivers, the state of our roads even, and our ditches and our gullies, and the way that we do drainage and don't do drainage and so on. So that's a major area that we want to look at this year. We've had difficulties getting officers to agree some of our work programme. We had an earlier action travel, active travel set of recommendations. We wanted to set that against the emerging LC whip. That hasn't happened, and I'm thinking of doing a report for Cabinet in February to highlight that, because I don't think the scrutiny process is still working as well as it should be within the council. Thank you.
Just before we go to Councillor Crockett, I noticed on the on the CCSC work programme, there is looking at the transformation of the Economy and Environment Directorate. Is it on your committee, or is
That's
it?
mine.
But well, it's on your committee, but it will be of just as much interest to your committee. So I hope that you are talking to each other about. Sorry, Councillor Crockett.
Thank you, Chair. Just to let you all know that at last we've got the task and finish group for adult social care agreed. We too had difficulties in organising and agreeing this, but I'd like to say thank you now. We have got a clearer understanding of what we're looking at, and I think it's even more apt today to announce that, because you know we've been looking at what we provide, how we commission, and the cost of all these things. So yeah, that will be kicking off now. So watch this space.
The only thing that I'm really hyper aware of is a huge, the vast amount of the council's revenue spend sits in the area overseen by your committee. So I hope that you feel able to kind of ask for help if there are areas where you think it's important, but your committee doesn't have the capacity to look into it.
Yeah, if you get a chance to have a look at the work programme for that, it covers many areas. So when we need some support and input from other committees, we will ask and give you plenty of warning.
Before I let I'm just going to mention what the Scrutiny Management Board has been up to. So members will be aware that we have started a rapid piece of work parallel to the budget on commercialisation, which I think there are some interesting things that are coming out of it, which were reflected today. But we need to, I need to talk to Daniel about how we sort of tie that together into something that we can all agree, and then make some recommendations to Cabinet soon. So I will be taking that away. The Inequality Task and Finish Group has started its work. It's met several times. It's Councillor Cornthwaite is also a member of that Task and Finish Group. Inequality is a huge area, and so some of our work has been to sort of decide what bit of inequality we're focusing on, and our focus has sort of come down into what you might call economic inequality, so wages, that sort of thing, and that's brought us into qualifications, social mobility, and so that it sort of overlaps a lot of interest for connected communities and children and young people. So I haven't yet sort of had a catch up with the chairs of those committees, but I don't think they'll be displeased with what we're doing. And one area that that is emerging is the council has a lot of hard data, but very little of the voices of people who are experiencing the consequences of inequality, and so that's going to be a focus for us. That's all I have. So Councillor Stark, then Councillor O'Driscoll to come.
It's just going back to what you were saying about helping out the health and wellbeing committee. We've talked about the ICB today. We've talked about what is the executive cabinet doing about it. We need to scrutinise that specifically, I think. I don't know whether it should be at SMB or not, it could be, but that is a major area of pressure on us in terms of costs. And it's something we don't necessarily have control over. So I just wonder whether that should be a potential candidate, either for the SMB or for your committee. I don't know what you think.
I think we'll have to have a further discussion on this one and see which is the best place.
Councillor O'Driscoll?
Yeah, it was only to say when I was talking about our work programme for CCSC that I didn't mention the fact that our task and finish group, our placemaking and public participation task group, has now met. I'm pleased to say we were oversubscribed for the number of people that wanted to take part. We had a very good meeting, our first meeting last week, and we're going to be really looking at how we can properly bring the community across the whole county with us on this journey, with the number of homes that we're going to have to build over the coming years. And what's quite opportune is that with the launch of the local plan next year, we have to replace the statement of community involvement with a new community involvement scheme next year. So we're going to be feeding into the development of that statement. So there's a specific task in mind for how we can properly engage with the community, so that that all the houses that are going to be coming online, it's going to be done with the community rather than to them.
There's one thing that has come up in our discussion today that I have put on the long list for SMB, because I do think that's probably where it sits, which is this relationship with the voluntary sector. So and strengthening partnership working with the voluntary sector. I'm quite well, I think that probably is a task and finish type piece of work, and so I imagine we would not want to start it until the inequality task and finish group has finished its work. But that also a more sort of tangible thing is I'm really interested in social value in procurement and how we're managing that, because we're letting large contracts. We're expecting social value to be part of that, and so I think it would be interesting to have a look at that. But that probably is a more sort of tangible, just a report. Councillor Crockett.
Yeah, I think that talk community would be pivotal in that piece of work as well.
Yes, good point. Thank you. Any other observations on sort of gaps that you think are not being covered, or things that you... Yes, Councillor Stark.
Should we plan, Daniel, for an emergency meeting following the funding settlement? Because that could be something that could blow us out the water next year and beyond, because it's a 3-year settlement.
We can talk to the Section 151 officer, but I don't think there's any point us having a meeting until the accountants have gone through the figures and the cabinet have some idea of what it means to them.
Chair, I would certainly suggest that we ask for a briefing once we've got.
It's my understanding the settlement will come over the Christmas holidays. You have a meeting on the 23rd, so I'm not sure that there's much capacity to do anything other than the most rudimentary sharing of the headlines. I mean, I could ask, but I think that what you'll get will be quite limited, and I certainly don't think it will be anything more than the presentation that Cabinet might receive, say.
Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, I just thinking about gaps and other things, was just quickly looking through the forward plan and whether or not we're picking up on any of that in gaps. And I did notice, and I was thinking of your scrutiny committee. So in January, we've also got the allocation of the Climate and Nature Reserve Phase 2 and the Herefordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. And I'm just wondering whether that's something that's going to be scrutinised or something that we would be asking for all members' briefings from. So they both seem quite large items, considering that we're trying to get hold of a new core strategy and figure out how on earth we're going to meet a large housing target that we hadn't anticipated.
I'll ask Councillor Stark to go and think about that as the chair of the relevant committee. Any more? Okay, in that case, I don't think there's nothing to move on that. It was useful just to hear what all the scrutiny committees are doing. There is an awful lot going on. Let's keep up the good work. Our next meeting is on my script. The date of our next meeting is Friday, the 23rd of January, here at, it says 10 p.m, but I imagine it is actually 10 a.m.
We've had 11
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
This is why I